Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. I felt the need to do this video following some of the comments that I saw on the video that I did of the Heath Ryan whipping scandal. For those of you who might not know what I'm talking about, I recommend going back and watching that video that I posted a few days ago. But for context, it's a video about an upper level, Olympic level dressage rider who was caught on video whipping a horse 42 times. Every single time I post any video about an abuse scandal where the footage hasn't come out immediately after it happened, I always receive comments that say things like, the people who witnessed this and didn't say anything are just as bad. They're just as bad as the abuser. Shame on them. How dare they wait this long? And I wanted to talk about this because it's victim blaming. It fails to acknowledge the amount of pressures and coercive forces that are involved to keep people silenced. It fails to acknowledge the amount of power people have, especially when they're an upper level rider. And it fails to acknowledge how freaking scary it is to come up against someone who is bigger than you, especially when it means ostracizing yourself from the rest of your community sometimes, because all of these trainers have big communities of friends and supporters and students who will turn on anyone who speaks out against them. So by putting out that information and by effectively telling on them, you are putting yourself in the line of fire. And I think that is incredibly important because I also would like to add that the fixation on victims not coming out about what happened soon enough and trying to put blame on them, one, takes away from the abuser and what they did because it's now drawing attention to the person who did eventually put that information out there and focusing on the fact that they didn't do it early enough or well enough or whatever people want to say. And two, it discourages victims from speaking out in the future. If you want people to be willing to out abusers sooner, you need to make it safe to do so. And by blaming them and trying to guilt trip them for not speaking out soon enough, you're not creating a safe environment for them to do that. Because ultimately, if someone has been scared and they've put off putting out information about something that happened, something that they've witnessed, if they choose to do it years after the fact, that's better than not doing it at all. And they cannot jump in a time machine and do things earlier. So the types of comments that try to shame them for not speaking out early enough fail to help actually create a safe support system for people to feel okay in sharing this information earlier. The other thing that I think is really important to note is that a lot of people who witness abuse don't necessarily acknowledge it as such right away. And this doesn't just pertain to horses. This pertains to people who have been abused. They might be in denial of what they saw and what happened, and they might be trying to make excuses for the behavior, and it might take them time and distance away from the abuser before they are comfortable sharing that information and putting it out there. And people need to process things. Witnessing abuse is highly upsetting, and it's also very scary when you witness it and you can know that it's wrong, but then you have to worry about the backlash you might receive if you do anything. Also, governing organizations for horse sports are notoriously bad at actually holding upper level riders accountable. So some of the people who've witnessed these things have reported them through the respected avenues to do so, and then have not seen any repercussions come out of that. And then they choose to leak the footage after that because there's been a lack of accountability. But they try to go the route where they can stay anonymous and protect their identity first. And they put trust in the system to actually hold these people accountable. And then only when that doesn't happen do they take to the media and trying to put the information out to the greater public to try to force a decision on the part of these governing organizations. I think that we aren't acknowledging how the horse world functions as an industry and how much pressure there is from trainers onto students to stay silent and to never question anything, because it doesn't necessarily always have to be cases of severe abuse like Heath Ryan whipping a horse 42 times, but students that question what's going on and that question their trainers are often made to feel bad about it. I remember growing up when I would question things with trainers, they would say things that would put me down and would make me feel stupid for asking. And then eventually over time, I just learned not to ask. And this started from the time I was a child because I started riding at 4 years old. So it's a conditioning process that happens slowly over time. And you learn to be really scared of speaking up because oftentimes when you do, you're shamed for it. Or worse, if you speak up in a highly public place, you get dogpiled by people who are all now mad at you and lashing out at you, and it opens you up to so much hate. I want to share an instance that happened to me 5 years ago. And this is a lot less severe than going up against an Olympian, and it's a lot less severe than outing someone for whipping a horse 42 times, but I was still very scared to speak out about this, despite the fact that in comparison, this person is much smaller and has less pull. I also want to point out the fact that I have built an online following that does afford me, to some extent, a level of protection, because I have a community of people who will, at least in part, stand behind me. So it creates a degree of accountability because I have a platform to share information to and have people read it and have it get passed on and shared as a result. But if I was someone without a platform, I wouldn't have that protection. I wouldn't have that body of people to serve as a pressure point to try to create change. And I would be standing alone in making reports or speaking out against people, which would make it all the more scarier. But anyways, 5 years ago, I was working for a trainer who I had been working for 2 years at that point. And there was some stuff over the course of time that like made me uncomfortable, but ultimately I was trying to see the best in this person, and I never quite felt comfortable around them, and there was always this nagging feeling, but I felt that it was just because this person was a male trainer and I had predominantly ridden with female riders, and I was just more uncomfortable around men. So I was telling myself like, oh, don't be sexist, you're being biased, this isn't a problem, you don't have a reason to feel this way. But there is this pervasive discomfort that I felt virtually all the time around this person. And there were certain lapses in the care of the horses and the horsemanship that started to crack and like be apparent to me. Because initially this trainer started out really heavily advocating for turnout and the importance of it, and had horses out in group turnout situations and like a well set up area for horses like that. But then over time, after moves from different barns, the horses ended up in a situation where there was very limited turnout and only grass turnout during like May to September. And the horses were spending a lot of time stalled, like probably 20 plus hours a day. And their behavior changed as a result, and it made me uncomfortable. But there was always all of these excuses, and I wanted to give the person the benefit of the doubt. So I tried to overlook it because they were making excuses and talking about how they intended to build paddocks and turnouts for the horses, and that this was just temporary. But it didn't appear to actually be temporary because it continued. But that's not actually what the issue that happened was. The problem that happened was during the Black Lives Matter protests when George Floyd was murdered, and I was posting all over my social channels about this and the systemic injustice and about police brutality, and I was very, very vocal. It was no secret where I stood on this. It was no secret that my dad is Black, and it was no secret that I'm a biracial person. This is something that I had made abundantly clear, and this trainer was well aware of that. Despite that, despite having me on social media and seeing what I was posting, he opened up a conversation about Black Lives Matter that initially started out seeming well-intentioned and just like talking about the current events. And it started out okay, but then it devolved into a conversation where he was denying the presence of police brutality and saying that it wasn't true and that George Floyd was committing a crime and that he got what he deserved. And it became this discussion where he was denying statistical evidence that shows that Black people are disproportionately targeted for things like this. And then it got to the point where he was just repeatedly saying, you have to agree, white people have a reason to be afraid of Black people. And he kept repeating that, and I would respond with, no, not unless they're racist. And he kept repeating it again and again and again, trying to back me into a corner to get me to admit something that I fundamentally did not agree with and that went against all my morals. And he kept going. And then at one point when I kept repeating the same thing again and again, not unless they're racist. During all of this, I was on a horse. I was riding one of his horses, and the horse could feel the tension in the air, and the horse was uncomfortable with the situation too. But after like the 5th time that he said this and repeated it, he just went quiet and sat down on the mounting block, and I was like, thank God, this conversation's over. He's giving up. Thank God. But no, a few seconds later, he just bursts up from the mounting block and starts shouting at me and walking towards me, waving his hand and being like, you called me an uneducated racist. And he's yelling at me and like storming up to the horse and is like, get the fuck off my horse, and was being like aggressive in his behavior. And like, keep in mind, this is a big man. I am just a small person. I did have one other witness, which was my assistant at the time, but she did not say anything throughout this whole discussion. It was literally like a one-on-one thing where I felt like I was was just like being backed into a corner by a full grown man. And anyways, I get off the horse, I hand him the reins, I walk out of the barn, I go to the parking lot, and I go on my phone, I unfriend him on everything, I block him on everything, I block his number, and then after I left that day, I never talked to him again. I sat on this information and what had happened for I think a couple of weeks or so, and I really wanted to talk about it. I wanted to post about it because I was like, people need to know what this person is like. They need to know what happened to me. They need to know how much of an overstep it is for an employer to bring up these things and then try to back me in a corner and try to pressure me into agreeing with them and then get mad at me and effectively punish me when I didn't agree with them. And I did eventually write a post about it, and I didn't name the person. And when I wrote the post, I was so scared to post it. I was so scared of the retaliation that I might face, despite the fact that I had already had a well-established following, that if he did come for me and if he did say anything or if he did try to harm me, I would have a highly public platform to post that on to try to create accountability. But I was still terrified. This person also isn't a big enough name in the community to be as scary as an Olympian, but I was still terrified. And I did it anyways, but I was still scared. And honestly, to this day, it has been something where it's like talking about it is a little scary when it's in a highly public setting like this, because I worry about how he might come back and like how he might handle things. And especially when he knew where I lived and he knew where I kept my horses, this was very scary. There was one time after I made this post, and it was about a few months after this all would have happened, where I was riding my horse in the outdoor arena, and there's a road that's a ways off of the arena, but you can see from the arena. And I looked up and I saw his car pulled over, parked on the side of the road, presumably watching me in the arena, because it was parked exactly in the open location that you would need to be in to see what was going on. And that was terrifying. Like, I stopped riding and I just stopped in the middle of the arena and I just stared back at them. And then they eventually, like him and his wife, I'm assuming, eventually pulled away and left. But it was for sure his car, because he drove a really recognizable car. It was a truck with a different color grille that had been replaced, and it's like it's very, very recognizable. It has like a specific lift kit. Without a shadow of a doubt, it for sure was him watching me. And do you know how scary that is to be on a private property where you live, minding your own business, working with horses, and then look up and see this trainer that had treated you abusively watching you from the road? And technically he wasn't doing anything illegal, but it was scary and it's intimidating. And that's just a very small moment to describe how frightening it can be to speak out against people. And this is someone who does not have as much power and pull as an Olympian. Olympians have their hands in the pockets of officials with the FEI. They're friends with a lot of other trainers. They know a lot of people. They know brands. They know a ton of judges. They have a lot of connections. They have a lot of pull, and the amount of pressure and coercion they can use to push people into silence is even more severe. So I wanted to share this because I'm hoping to encourage people to just be more considerate of the fact that speaking up in any way against people like this, no matter when you do it, is a bold choice. And when we put more time into questioning someone's motives for releasing the information when they do, we are effectively helping these abusers by taking the heat off of them and placing it onto the people who spoke out simply because they witnessed something that they did not consent to witnessing, that they were just present for, and that they didn't speak out enough. And I think a lot of the people who complain about these victims and who say things like they should have spoken up sooner and blame them haven't been put in a situation where they have felt highly intimidated by someone and seen someone's true colors and wanted to share that information but been absolutely terrified to do so. I think a lot of the people making these judgments haven't felt that level of fear, and they need to have a little bit more perspective. It's not dissimilar to what people say about women that come out after the fact about having been sexually assaulted years prior, when the person who sexually assaulted them ends up getting a promotion or getting a job in high places or a place or is working or doing something where they're in a more respected position where they have influence over people, and they choose that time as the time to speak out because now they're pressured and compelled to do so because they're concerned that their abuser has access to tons of other people and is not seen as this dangerous person that they know that they are. And then they'll speak out. We saw this with the US President Donald Trump, where people started to speak out more and more about their sexual assault allegations about him when he started running for president. And the reason for that was because they saw their abuser running for president and they were freaking terrified. And that was something that was a big enough pressure and concern that they decided to speak out at that point. But ultimately, it doesn't really matter when someone chooses to speak out. It doesn't change what someone did. And Heath Ryan in particular, based off of the statement he made following what he did, it is very clear that he doesn't feel bad about what he did. He defended all of his actions and he did not take accountability. So while I think it's important to leave the door open that people can grow and change, and when we have abuse scandals coming out years after the fact, there is a chance that person could have had personal growth all throughout the years after and made serious changes that have led them to not being the person that they were in the video before. But if they haven't done that and they don't have evidence of it and they don't take proper accountability for what they do, it's highly unlikely that they actually feel bad. A lot of people only ever feel bad because they've gotten caught. And I think that this is a really important discussion to have. We need to stop fixating on the victims and complaining about them not speaking out fast enough. And we need to be keeping the focus on the abusers and the system that protects the abusers and makes it harder for victims to speak out, because that is the actual problem, not the victims. Thank you for watching. Anyone who's interested in supporting my content, look at the links down below. I have a Patreon channel. I have a website shop with horse bridles, bitless and bitted anatomical bridles, and equestrian apparel. The entire store is 30% off right now because I'm going to be taking a little bit of a hiatus once I sell out my inventory. So if you're interested in any of that stuff, I would greatly appreciate it if you'd help me move inventory, and you could shop some really good deals. You'll get an extra 30% off at checkout. And anyways, thank you as always for your support. Let me know your thoughts on this discussion down below, and if you've ever experienced these types of pressures or if you have a similar story. Thanks for watching.